Decimal numbers. Decimal numbers are fractions in tenths, hundredths, thousands, and so on that are written with a decimal point. We will be using a place value chart to help us see the decimal numbers. So, an example of a decimal number would be if I have this number here is known as 4/10. And I know that because I can take this number here and I can put a place value chart around it. This would be my ones place. If I continue to the left, this would be tens. This would be hundreds. To the right of the ones place, where we started out at the beginning of the year, we have the decimal place. And then after the decimal place, we have tenths. Tenths means 10 equal parts of a whole. So if I have one shape, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 lines will make 10 parts for me. This means I have 4 of those parts. So it's one shape with 10 parts, and I have 4 of them. This can also be written as the fraction 4/10. So all of these mean the same thing. The picture equals the decimal. But see how we use the place value chart to help us. Now sometimes you might have a number written like this, with a 0 before the digit 4. Well, we just went one more place to the right on the place value chart. The further right you go on the place value chart, the smaller the number gets. So if I have 4 here in this place would be the hundredths. And this follows the same pattern as tens, hundreds, thousands, except it has this little th on the end. And anytime you see a th, you know they're talking about a fraction of a number. The most common time that you will see a decimal is mainly when you are dealing with money. So something like this, $1.50. This means you have one whole dollar and 50 parts out of 100, or one whole dollar. Okay, so looking at this same thing, I have 4 hundredths. To write it as a fraction looks like this, 4 over 100. And then if I was going to change my picture, I'm not going to change the amount that's shaded. This is how I know I'm actually, sorry, I'm going to make a whole new picture. And then I'm going to make some horizontal lines. So my last little line leaves a little bit to be desired. By drawing 9 lines vertically and 9 lines horizontal, it gives me 100 pieces. And 4 hundredths means that I have 4 of those pieces colored in. So if you look at this, you can tell clearly that 4/10 is larger than 4 hundredths. And the reason being is because if I have one thing and I break it into 100 pieces, the pieces are way smaller. You see my red dots here as opposed to a whole column. So then if I go to compare those numbers, 4/10, so 4 hundredths, I know that 4/10 is greater because it has more. Now, one thing that's true, I'm going to make a whole new place value chart here. So my ones, my decimals, my tenths, my hundredths. And if I write 4/10 in here like I had previously, but I add a 0, then that becomes 40 hundredths. Why? Because now the last digit is in the hundredths column. So instead of writing 4/10 like I had before, I'm going to write 40 hundredths. These are equivalent fractions. They are equivalent fractions because I don't have to change the amount like I started to say earlier in error. I can just add lines going vertical to make 100 parts like I did in this other picture, but I have not changed the shaded amounts. So I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and 9 pieces. As you can see, I did not change what's shaded. I just made the pieces smaller. So now if you look and count, you would get 40 pieces out of 100 that are shaded. But if you look here, you still see that there are still 4 pieces of the red size that are all shaded in. If you look at that. So my original was 4/10, but when I made it into smaller pieces, it became 40 hundredths. You count all of these squares here in this picture, you see that there are 40 hundredths. So that is about decimals. So one last thing I want to talk about is adding decimals. When you are adding decimals together, the most important thing is that you keep the decimals in the same column that they belong in the same value. So say I wanted to add 4/10 plus 4 hundredths. I'm going to put my 0 here, 4/10. When I go to write my 4 hundredths, it's written like this. Oops, sorry. 4 hundredths. So as you know, I kept my decimal lined up. So I have a 0 here. So when I go to add, I'm going to add my hundredths. Nothing plus 4 is 4 hundredths. 4/10 plus 0/10 is 4/10. I'm going to put my decimal here. And 0 ones plus 0 ones is 0 ones. So now that gives me 44 hundredths, which written as a fraction looks like this. We haven't talked about reducing on this video, but you could reduce that into a smaller fraction. But that is decimal numbers.